Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?
No, officer. I was driving carefully.
You crossed the center line back there. Where are you coming from?
From work, sir. We're just heading home.
The red and blue lights reflecting off the rearview mirror weren't what made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the heavy, deliberate silence of the approaching officer, a quiet that felt loaded with a decision already made. It is a profound, terrifying realization when you understand that knowing the law inside and out doesn't shield you from it, but merely gives you a front row seat to your own rights being dismantled. The evening had started with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only comes from a 3-day criminal trial. Marcus, a senior defense attorney with 15 years in the trenches of the county courthouse, sat in a vinyl booth of a late-night diner, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights hummed with a low, metallic buzz that vibrated in your teeth. Across from him sat David, his 26-year-old junior associate, whose eyes were red-rimmed from staring at discovery documents for 72 hours straight. They were both still in their courtroom armor. Marcus wore a tailored charcoal suit, his silk tie loosened and pulled away from a stiff collar that had been pressing into his neck since 8 that morning. The diner was nearly empty. The audio landscape was sparse but distinct, the rhythmic clatter of a busboy dropping heavy ceramic mugs into a plastic tub, the hiss of the grill from the kitchen, and the soft, repetitive tapping of David's pen against a legal pad. Marcus rubbed his temples, staring at the remnants of a burnt coffee and a half-eaten slice of cherry pie. They had won the case, an acquittal for a client the system had tried to swallow whole, but there was no celebration tonight. There was only the quiet relief of survival and the desperate need to go home, fall into bed, and forget the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. When they finally pushed through the glass doors of the diner, the humid night air hit them like a wet towel. It was just past midnight in the district of the city that was trying its hardest to gentrify, but hadn't quite made it. Old brick warehouses sat next to dimly lit pawn shops, with only the occasional streetlight casting a sickly orange glow over the damp asphalt. The city felt hollowed out at this hour. The distant, echoing wail of a siren bled through the blocks, a sound so common it barely registered to either man. Marcus unlocked his car, a late model dark blue sedan, the heavy doors thudding shut with a solid, expensive sound that sealed them inside a quiet, leather-scented cocoon. He started the engine, the dashboard coming alive with a soft, ambient glow. David leaned his head against the passenger window, letting out a long breath. Marcus put the car in drive, the tires gently peeling away from the wet curb. He drove with the careful precision of a man who spent his life analyzing the consequences of split-second mistakes. They were exactly 4 blocks away from the diner when Marcus noticed the headlights, 2 bright, unblinking eyes pulled out from a side street, settling into the lane directly behind them. Marcus's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. He didn't tense. Not immediately, but a familiar, low-level hum of vigilance woke up in the back of his mind. He checked his speedometer, 30 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He checked his hands, 10 and 2. He made sure his turn signal clicked a full 3 seconds before merging into the right lane to let the vehicle pass. The vehicle didn't pass. It merged with him. The interior of the sedan suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. David, sensing the subtle shift in the car's deceleration, opened his eyes and glanced at the side mirror. The reflection of a mounted light bar was just visible against the silhouette of a police cruiser. For 3 agonizing minutes, the cruiser shadowed them. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the wet road seemed to amplify, drowning out the soft jazz playing on the radio. Marcus's mind began to race, calculating variables. 2 men, 1 black, 1 white, wearing expensive suits in a neighborhood known for narcotics trafficking, driving a high-end vehicle past midnight. He knew exactly what the officer behind them was seeing, or rather, what the officer was choosing to see. The officer wasn't seeing 2 exhausted officers of the court. He was seeing a statistical probability He was seeing an anomaly, and in law enforcement, anomalies are treated as threats. The cruiser's lights ignited. The sudden burst of red and blue fractured the darkness, casting aggressive, strobing shadows across the interior of Marcus's car. The sudden chirp of the police siren cut through the night, a sharp, commanding sound that demanded immediate submission. Marcus exhaled slowly, steering the sedan smoothly to the shoulder, the tires crunching over loose gravel and broken glass. He put the car in park, turned off the engine, and removed the keys. Placing them clearly on the dashboard, he pressed the button to roll down all four windows, letting the damp night air flood the cabin. Finally, he turned on the overhead dome light, illuminating the interior in a stark, uncompromising glare. Hands on the dash. "David," Marcus said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that brokered no argument. David swallowed hard, his theoretical knowledge of the law suddenly evaporating in the face of the flashing lights behind them. He placed his hands flat on the black leather, his fingers trembling slightly. The heavy thud of the cruiser's door closing echoed behind them. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, the crunch of boots on gravel, measuring out the tension second by second. The crackle of a two-way radio hissed loudly as the officer closed the distance. Marcus stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the top of the steering wheel. A flashlight beam swept violently into the car, blinding Marcus momentarily before settling on his chest. Officer Vance leaned down, his face a shadow behind the harsh glare of the maglite. Vance was a veteran, a man whose posture carried the stiff, uncompromising rigidity of 20 years on the force. He wasn't a man who operated on malice. He operated on a set of deeply ingrained heuristics. To Vance, this neighborhood at this time of night meant trouble, and this car didn't belong here. That was all the justification he needed. Evening, Vance said, his tone flat, devoid of any conversational warmth, license, registration, and proof of insurance. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied, his voice a perfectly calibrated instrument, calm, respectful, but devoid of subservience. "My license is in my wallet in my back right pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed?" Vance's flashlight flicked from Marcus to David, lingering on David's rigid posture, then back to Marcus. "Get the license first." Slowly, Marcus shifted, pulling his wallet free and extracting his ID. He handed it through the window. "Officer, may I ask why we were stopped this evening?" Vance didn't look at Marcus. He stared at the license. Shining his light directly onto the plastic, "You crossed the solid yellow line back on 4th and Elm. Failure to maintain lane." Marcus knew instantly, with absolute certainty, that it was a lie. He had been hyper-focused on his driving since leaving the diner. He hadn't touched the yellow line. It was a pretextual stop, a legally permissible maneuver sanctioned by Wenvy, United States, allowing officers to use a minor traffic violation as an excuse to investigate a hunch. But the violation still had to actually occur. Marcus said nothing. Arguing on the side of the road was a fool's errand. "You fight the battle in the courtroom, not on the asphalt." "Where are you two coming from?" Vance asked, his tone shifting from administrative to interrogative. "We were getting food at the diner on 6th. Marcus answered smoothly. "We're heading home from work." Work? Vance's voice held a note of skeptical amusement. He looked at their suits. "Bit late to be wearing a tie." "Isn't it? What kind of work?" "We are attorneys." "Officer, we just finished a trial." The flashlight beam dropped slightly. The dynamic had shifted, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of deference, Vance's posture hardened. An attorney was a complication. An attorney was someone who knew exactly where the lines were drawn, which meant Vance felt an immediate instinctual need to establish total control. Sit tight. Vance muttered, turning on his heel and walking back to the cruiser. The silence in the car returned heavier. Now, David let out a shaky breath. Marcus, you didn't cross the yellow line. I was watching. I know, Marcus said softly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching Vance sitting in his cruiser, bathed in the blue light of his mobile data terminal. It's a fishing expedition. He's running our plates and IDs. When they come back clean, he has to let us go. He doesn't have reasonable, articulable suspicion to extend the stop, but the minutes dragged on. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The radio in the cruiser squawked intermittently. The damp chill of the night seeped into the car, but Marcus was sweating. The prolonged delay was a red flag. A standard traffic stop for a lane violation takes roughly 10 minutes to write a citation and return the documents. Any longer, and the officer is crossing into dangerous constitutional territory without independent justification. Marcus's mind immediately went to Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court ruling that explicitly states police may not extend a completed traffic stop, even for a few minutes, to conduct a dog sniff or further investigation without reasonable suspicion. Vance finally stepped out of the cruiser, but he didn't have a citation book in his hand. He walked back to Marcus's window, leaning in closer this time. The smell of stale coffee and damp wool rolled off his uniform. Mr. Hayes, Vance said, using Marcus's last name, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of practiced calm. Legally, under Pennsylvania v. Mims, an officer can order a driver out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop without any further justification. It is an absolute command. Am I under arrest? Officer, no, you're not under arrest. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, keeping his hands visible, and opened the door. The cold air rushed over him as he stood up on the shoulder of the road. He was a few inches taller than Vance, a physical reality that seemed to make the officer instinctively drop his hand to rest near the butt of his sidearm. It was a subtle movement, perhaps even unconscious, but it screamed volumes about the fear and bias operating beneath the surface of the badge. Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the car, Vance ordered. Marcus paused. Officer, you ordered me out of the car, which is your right. But a Terry frisk requires reasonable, articulable suspicion that I am armed and presently dangerous. I am in a suite. I have fully complied, and I have given you no reason to believe I have a weapon. I do not consent to any searches or seizures. Vance's jaw tightened. The legal jargon wasn't intimidating him, it was irritating him. It was a challenge to his authority on a dark street where he was used to having absolute power. You're acting nervous. Mr. Hayes, your passenger is visibly shaking. In this neighborhood, that gives me reason to ensure my own safety. Hands on the roof. It was a gross misapplication of the law. Nervousness alone does not justify a pat down, but on the street, the officer is the judge. Jure, an executioner of the moment. Resistance, even lawful resistance, escalates the danger exponentially. Marcus turned, placing his hands flat on the cold, damp metal of the roof. He spread his legs. Vance stepped in, kicking Marcus's feet wider apart, and conducted a rough, thorough pat-down. He found nothing but a cell phone and a set of keys. Stand by the trunk, Vance instructed. He walked back to the window, shining his light on David. Is there anything illegal in this car? Weapons, large amounts of currency, narcotics? No? Sir, David stammered, his voice cracking. Nothing. Then you won't mind if I take a look inside. I absolutely mind. Marcus projected his voice from the rear of the vehicle, loud enough to ensure the cruiser's dashcam microphone picked it up clearly. I am the owner of the vehicle. I do not consent to any search of my car, mit trunk, or any containers therein. Vance turned back to Marcus, a cold, hard look in his eyes. You're making this very difficult, counselor. If you have nothing to hide, why not? Let me look. Because the Fourth Amendment doesn't require me to prove my innocence to you, officer, you pulled me over for a lane violation. Write the ticket or let us go. You are unlawfully prolonging this detention. Vance stared at him for a long, heavy moment. The tension hung in the humid air, thick and suffocating. Vance grabbed his shoulder mic. Dispatch. Send a K9 unit to my location. Marcus closed his eyes. The procedural mistake had just solidified. The stop was now officially, unconstitutionally prolonged. Vance had no probable cause to search the car, and his mere hunch based on two men in suits in a bad neighborhood did not meet the threshold for reasonable suspicion to hold them for a dog. But the reality of the street was dictating the terms. 15 excruciating minutes passed. The silence was broken only by the crackle of the radio and the occasional passing car, its headlights washing over the tense tableau on the shoulder. Finally, a second cruiser arrived. An officer pulled a German Shepherd from the back. The dog whined. Eager to work. Stand back. The canny handler ordered Marcus. They walked the dog around the sedan. On the second pass, near the rear passenger door, the dog suddenly sat down, scratching at the seam of the door. The handler looked at Vance and nodded. We got an alert. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew the interior of his car was spotless. He knew there were no narcotics. But a dog's alert, regardless of its validity, instantly provides probable cause for a full, warrantless search of the vehicle under the automobile exception. It is the ultimate legal loophole, a magic trick that turns a hunch into unquestionable authority. Vance opened the doors. He and the handler began tearing through the interior. They pulled out the floor mats, emptied the glove compartment, and rummaged through the center console. Then Vance reached into the back seat and grabbed Marcus's heavy leather litigation briefcase. Officer, Marcus called out, his voice sharp and commanding, dropping the polite deference. That briefcase contains privileged attorney-client work product. You do not have the right to read those files. Vance ignored him. He popped the latches. The sound of the metallic snaps echoed loudly in the quiet night. He began pulling out manila folders, flipping through sensitive trial notes, client testimonies, and defense strategies, shining his flashlight over the pages. He was no longer looking for drugs. He was looking for a reason, any reason, to justify the humiliation he was currently inflicting. He was desperately searching for retroactive validation. For 10 minutes, they dissected the contents of the vehicle. Finally, Vance slammed the briefcase shut and tossed it haphazardly back onto the seat. He slammed the car doors. He walked over to Marcus, his face completely unreadable. He handed Marcus his license and registration. Keep it between the lines next time. Mr. Hayes, you're free to go. There was no ticket. There was no written warning. There was only the sudden, jarring dismissal, the abrupt end to an agonizing demonstration of power. Vance walked back to his cruiser without another word. Marcus and David got back into the car. The interior looked like it had been ransacked. Files were scattered, compartments left open. Marcus sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly. His knuckles were white. The cruisers pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the dark, leaving Marcus and David alone on the shoulder of the road. The silence in the car was deafening. It wasn't the silence of relief. It was the suffocating silence of violation. But Marcus was not a man who let the system swallow him. He was a mechanic of the law, and he knew exactly how to dismantle the machine that had just tried to crush him. The consequences did not happen overnight. Justice is rarely a sudden, dramatic climax. It is usually a slow, grinding war of attrition. The very next morning, Marcus filed a formal complaint with the police department's internal affairs division. He didn't just allege bias. He alleged specific, documented violations of the Fourth Amendment. He immediately submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the dash cam footage, the body cam footage from both officers, and the dispatch audio logs from that night when the department inevitably dragged its feet, citing ongoing investigations. Marcus filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging unlawful detention and illegal search. The lawsuit forced the department to produce the digital evidence in discovery, and that was when the turning point arrived. The truth wasn't revealed through a dramatic courtroom confession. It was revealed in the sterile, undeniable reality of metadata and synced audio tracks. Marcus sat in a brightly lit conference room with his managing partner, Chief of Police Harland, and the city's municipal attorney. On the large screen at the end of the table, the body cam footage played, but it wasn't the video that destroyed Vance's narrative. It was the audio. The footage showed Vance sitting in his cruiser after taking Marcus's license. He had momentarily muted his primary radio mic, but he had forgotten to mute his body cam audio. The room listened in dead silence as Vance's voice, clear as a bell, spoke to a trainee riding shotgun who hadn't been visible from Marcus's car. Look at these two. Vance's voice sneered from the speakers. Suits in this neighborhood at midnight. Dark sedan, probably dropping off cash for the cartel guys on 8th. I don't care if they crossed the line or not. I'm tossing that car. Let's see what we can shake loose. The city attorney closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, but the devastating blow came from the dispatch logs. The K-9 unit hadn't been called after Marcus supposedly acted nervous during the pat-down. The timestamps proved that Vance had requested the K-9 unit a full 2 minutes before he even stepped out of his cruiser to approach Marcus's car the second time. The entire sequence of events, the prolonged detention, the pat-down, the dog sniff, was a premeditated, unconstitutional fabrication designed to bypass the Fourth Amendment. The failure to maintain lane was unequivocally proven false when the dashcam footage showed Marcus's car driving perfectly within the lines for 3 blocks before the lights went on. The fallout was methodical and quietly brutal. There was no screaming, no cinematic firing in the chief's office. The city settled the lawsuit for a substantial sum, which Marcus immediately donated to a legal aid clinic. Officer Vance was placed on administrative leave, and following the internal affairs probe, he was offered early retirement to avoid a public termination that would force the district attorney to review every single arrest Vance had made over the last 5 years. Chief Harlan was forced to institute mandatory, independent audits of all traffic stops in the district, specifically looking for the exact pretextual patterns Vance had utilized. The culture of the department suffered a seismic, humiliating fracture, exposed by a man who simply knew the rules better than the people enforcing them. Yet, despite the legal victory, despite the settlement and the policy changes, the reality of that night lingered. A month later, Marcus was driving home from another grueling trial. It was late. The city was dark. The pavement was wet from a recent rain. He drove his dark blue sedan through the city streets, the soft jazz playing low on the radio. He was a partner at his firm, now a respected pillar of the legal community. But as a pair of bright headlights pulled out from a side street and settled in behind him, illuminating the interior of his car, Marcus felt his shoulders instantly tense. He checked his speed. He checked his hands, 10 and 2. He watched the lights in the rearview mirror. His breath shallow. waiting for the flash of red and blue. If the people tasked with upholding the law are the ones bending it in the shadows, who exactly is the justice system designed to protect, and who is it designed to control? True justice isn't just about winning in the courtroom. It is about surviving the very system that claims to protect you long enough to hold it accountable.